So this lesson is about negative exponents. It's to help you if you're having trouble with your negative exponents. So an exponent, anything to the negative number, so we would have something like x to the negative 1, is unhappy. And in this case, it's in the numerator, and it's unhappy in the numerator. So we need to move it to the denominator to make it happy. So it goes from being negative to positive if we move it into the denominator. So we're going to get 1 over x. So anything with an exponent in negative power needs to be flipped. In the reverse, if it was 1 over x to the negative 1, we'd flip it up from the denominator to the numerator and make it x, and now it's happy, so it's positive. Okay, so now we're going to look at negative exponents with like some numbers. So here's an example. We have 2 to the negative 2. Because it's in the numerator and it's a negative exponent, we're going to put it in the denominator. 2's, any number, whole number always has a 1 under it. So you could almost imagine that this is 2 over 1. And so if we flip that, we get up with 1 over 2 to the second. Notice that it keeps the same exponent that it had before. It had a 2 before. It still has a 2. That didn't change. But now it's a positive exponent and not negative. I see a lot of people sometimes will get confused and they'll write like a negative outside here and make the number negative. But remember, we're dealing with exponents when we're dealing with the negative exponents. So that's not at any point going to affect the constant, the number here. This is not going to change the sign. So this stays whatever sign it was originally, and then the exponent sign changes, and only the exponent sign changes. So if we go ahead and figure this one out, we get 1 over 4. We can do the same thing with 4 to the negative 1. It's going to become 1 over 4. And if you want, you can write a positive 1 there. It doesn't matter, because we know from the identity, the exponent identity rule, anything to the 1 is just the base. So there's that. So another example we're going to look at is this is what you do when you have a negative exponent in the denominator. So we're looking at it here. We have x to the negative 2. We can rewrite that as x to the second. The thing is that both of these are equivalent, so it depends on what you're needing at that point. If somebody says, I want the answer you give me to not be in any sort of fraction, then it makes sense to put it into this form here, right? But if somebody gives you this form and says, hey, give it to me with negative exponents, you'd give them this back. So there's that. So let's look at something like x to the 4th over x to the negative 3rd, right? So the way to look at this is 2 ways to look at this. One is if we could take you could take x to the 4th, and we could go ahead and just move that x to the negative 3rd up so that we get x to the 4th times x to the 3rd. And then we know we add exponents when you multiply bases, so we get x to the 7th there. A second way we can look at this is to say, okay, I have x to the 4th on top, and I know from my rules of exponents that when I divide, I subtract. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that. That equals x to the 4th minus a negative 3 in the exponents. And then when you subtract 2 negatives, you end up with positive, so you end up with x to the 7th. Either way, you get the same answer. So summing up what we were talking about here is if we had the number in the denominator, x to the negative 2 in the denominator, we're going to move that to the numerator and make it positive so that we get x to the positive 2. And vice versa, so that if I have x to the negative 2 in the numerator, I'm going to put that into the denominator and make it positive, so x to the 2 in the denominator with 1 over it. If you move a negative exponent, it keeps the same exponent, but now it's positive. Remember that? And that the negative exponent, or negative on an exponent, does not transfer to the base. So you're never going to get like x to the negative 2 and end up writing that as a negative x to the second. We're just not going to do that.